Hey, I'm Heath Weaver. I'm the remote executive, and I want to talk a little bit about distraction today. So I don't want to talk about your, as let's say if you're working remote generally, or if you're are new to remote working, kind of the typical stuff that people talk about, but rather from an executive standpoint and from a kind of a more senior level. So I will talk a little bit about a more senior level, dealing with distraction on a more senior level, but then primarily about like how to help other people. So how do you get that leverage out of the people that are working for you or within the organization? So I think let me start with a couple of examples. So I've worked with a lot of executives, and I've seen many different setups. And some of the interesting one, I had worked with one executive who rented out an obviously really nice office space in a tall office building, because you could see peripherally that they had a very good view, so they had to be fairly high up. I think they were in I think they were in Dallas, if I remember correctly, and they had invested quite a bit in a very good camera system. You could see that that they had the ability to have like a far up and a close up and a far away view from their camera. They were looking like obviously at a very large screen. It's like and they had some distance from that, so because you could also see sometimes they'd have people sit in the same room as them, and at that point they'd have like a more wide angle camera and they could see them back at their desk, and they had like seats next to them. So they'd clearly spent tens of thousands of dollars on trying to like get their setup correct. And now alternatively, I've also seen very, very senior executives, like very large companies, COO types, who had a nice camera but basic, and then they just were in like their office with some French doors behind them. It was clearly like a very nice house, but it was not like really well decorated or something. They were just all about the work. They could just see that just was not important to them. But they although their back was to like some French doors, and occasionally you'd see the wife or something come back, but like very seldom. They were clearly in some part of the house that was like more isolated. The big majority of people I've worked with do not have good setups. They don't have good camera setups. They don't have like very good environments. I think if you're a high paid executive, you literally have like no excuse. I think you must think of it like it's just the same way that if you're presenting to clients or you're presenting internally, like the way that you present yourself, it matters to people, and it makes a difference of how they perceive you. So to me, I've just always made sure that I have like a very good camera. I use a DSLR. I hook it up correctly. If I need, I have a very good microphone. I don't use that most of the time, but like if I'm doing a presentation, that I'll use that. And like the environment around like matters, just what people are looking at. So I think that's just one side of things, just to make sure that like if you like that you want to be perceived the same way that you would in person, like that you represent yourself well. I'm okay to wear a t-shirt. I don't need to wear a collared shirt all the time, just because like that kind of fits better with the type of people I work with. But if I was working at a larger company, I would also make sure that I'm always looking good and having like not necessarily a tie, but sometimes like why not? Like I like that to look like I like to dress up and look good. So I think the main thing you have to think is like, even if you don't think it matters, like take the time to either have an assistant or have someone or pay somebody, consultant, whatever, you find somebody that can help you set up your system correctly, and just like look at it from a kind of like almost from a YouTube standpoint. Like, is that a compelling environment? Is it something which is distracting? Is it plain and makes you look like you just don't care? Do you present yourself like you don't care? Do you have a quality of video that you don't care? I just think there's really not a good excuse for that. And for any executives I've worked with, I typically, like at a more senior level, when people are becoming managers or whatever, if they don't have a good environment, I will tell them like, hey, fix that. Make it look like you actually care about the way that your environment is. Okay, so let's move that. So that just to summarize, it matters. Fix it. You've got no excuse not to. If you're making good money, like stop just messing around with it, and just like make it look nice. And so now going into the more important topic, which is the distraction aspect. Well, yeah. So as I think about that, when you're dealing with the distraction of employees, I grew up in a family of 8, and I had 6 siblings. I mean 5 siblings and myself. And so I grew up in a very chaotic environment. We're very poor. We didn't have a huge house or anything. Often sharing bedrooms. And so I just learned since I was little to be able to block out the world. If I want, I've always loved to read and draw and do different kind of things which require like quite a bit of focus. So I just learned from a very young age to just simply block things out, and that's made it so that I can be kind of anywhere and work, and I don't have too much of a problem to just like block out things going on, and that makes it so I quite like this type of open space. But most people are not very good with that. And when you're looking like one of the problems with remote work is that it's like you have very little control over the person's work environment, because that's kind of one of the promises of remote work is like you can work where you want. But it's not true. Like you can't work wherever you want. Like you can go somewhere and be there and pretend you're working. But like if you're in a really crowded place where things are really fighting for your attention, you're not going to be able to do very good work. And I've seen that a lot. So it's kind of like on the one side, the thing is that having an office means you can control the environment of the people in your office. You can kind of put quite a bit of control on that and try to create different environments for different type of interactions. But when people are working remote, they expect to be able to manage that for themselves. Now, if you're an employer and you're like, okay, we work remotely, but I'm going to you must have a certain criteria of the type of place that you work in, then it kind of defeats the purpose of being a remote worker. And I think that would be not very attractive for most employees. Now, but it's kind of in a more roundabout way, or in a leadership way. You've got to end up doing that in any case. You've got to be able to push people to have an environment which is really conducive to work. I think one example for me that I had is I had someone working for me, and she had a kid that was around 5, if I remember correctly, and you could just see that kid was like there quite often. Now she still worked reasonably well, but she was very distracted, because I think that while we weren't on calls, then the kid was maybe with the grandma or was being asked to like sit down and play. But like anybody who has kids and that their kids like them, like the kids come around all the time. Like they're constantly, they would rather come over and sit on your lap and like, smash your keyboard than play quietly by themselves or draw or something. And at 5 years old, maybe once they get to 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, like all that, then they're happier to be in the room or to go or whatever. But there's going to be that's going to be a constant distraction for the employees. And that kind of thing, like when you see it, it's more like you have to you have to kind of like let a person know that type of thing is not acceptable, because like if they have no other option, they just need to go in an office and or find some situation to have a babysitter, because it's just really, there's nobody that can resist their 5-year-old's constant interruptions. That's just impossible. So it's just not a good circumstances that you should allow if you're seeing it. In the interview process, I think it's something where I don't think we ask very often about that. But if someone was working with me and I see that their situation, like their setup is not it doesn't look like a reasonable distraction-free setup, then I'm going to pass on it, just because it makes such a big difference. Other things which I've seen in studies and that thing is of just like not having correct glasses when you need them, having your screen at the wrong height, like the lighting, like there's so many things which have such a drastic impact on your ability to focus. It's actually a pretty big deal. So we would have a training in people's onboarding, which really went over those things. I found a couple different videos that had all of these different things of kind of like how to set up the most distraction-free environment. Of course, like the result you want from people, the results you want, you set up their work in terms of helping them to set up their inputs and to track their inputs and then like have quality aspects on it. And like the important part is the work. But in getting people to kind of pay attention to that, like that's something which should be part of the thinking. And when you're on calls with people and you're doing your check-in chats, your like one-on-ones, whatever, It's something that you want to be looking at inside of it when you're talking to somebody and just trying to like figure out what is the likelihood that that person is going to be distracted by their environment. Is it high or low? Now, what I would say that the biggest, so I guess the first point there is like, just pay attention to that for yourself. Like we talked about that, and then pay attention to for your employees of just looking from the first place when you're thinking about hiring somebody, of what kind of environment they have and the likelihood of their distraction, and the type of distractions for that, and then be already making notes on that of like what's likely to come and to help the person to avoid it. If they already don't have like a reasonable office space, if they have again, children running around all the time, like it's just like they're not going to focus. It'll be fine. It'll be better at the beginning, but it'll just get worse and worse. They'll go back to their like distracted environment, and they're probably wanting to work remote just because they simply don't have the organization for their families or for themselves that allow for distraction-free work. And in our days, especially with the younger people coming up that are just kind of have been raised on social media, like their ability to focus anyway often is like very, very low. So you just kind of have to like watch for that in the hiring process. Now, once you hire somebody, then you just have to see whether or not they're like a very distracted person or not, or whether they can focus. I had an interesting conversation with the preschool teacher, and she said for my daughter, she said like, oh, it's really, your daughter is like, she's really so focused and she's able to focus so well, and she looks at me when she talks and she listens to me. And I can see that she's following what I'm saying. She said a big majority of the kids already at that age, and we're talking at 3 years old, already can't look at the teacher for very long. If they're watching television all the time or watching these kind of videos with this constant changes, they just simply can't focus on the person for very long without getting distracted and like wanting to change their attention after 2 seconds. So I think that just like is something that's goes throughout that. So if somebody's quite skilled, or somebody that is worthwhile that you want to hire, but they're a very distracted person, then you have to really help them doubly. You have to like really make the effort to try to help them to organize their environment. Now, I would say like for me, the open thing works well because I've learned how to deal with that. I've meditated most of my life. I know how to control my mind. But for most people, you have to kind of say like, well, why don't we get you in an office? Like where in your house can you work without this level of distraction if they haven't figured that out already. Now, so beside like the environmental part of things, which is like extremely important. So the space that somebody's working, how that space is organized, like whether it's clean or not, whether their computer setup is one where they're like head down looking at a laptop, whether they have glasses when they need them. There's a lot of those things which you can just like simply train people on and then ask them about it. Like just pay attention to the signs of people who are distracted and who are because they going, if you're managing well, they're going to be delivering results no matter what, but their ability to like sit down and do like focused work for like at least 3 hours end to end, when you ask them for something, are they able to actually like sit down and like do the thing? And if you see that that's a problem, then you're going to just want to start putting them in training, or to start having the discussions with them, having if you have management team, like those managers, I mean, like as an executive, if you're the people you're managing, those people need to start having those conversations to try to like help them. One of the things that I've seen that works quite well is having a kind of like getting everybody on the same channel and listening to music together. So on the same video channel, like they'll do a Zoom, they'll open up like a Zoom call, and then everybody on that team will go on there and listen to music together. And so like, it's kind of, there's a bit of control to that because people can see each other and then they can talk, but generally they're just like working, and then they choose some music that works well for everybody. And that's very similar to like, a cubicle or whatever, where everybody was like sitting around each other and listening to some music. So that works quite well, and I think that's like a very good idea for a lot of teams. Now, the other thing that I think from a kind of like setting things up, or rather getting like to get people to be able to focus and to avoid distraction, probably the most distracting thing that I've seen in almost all companies is Slack. Or we use Zoom just because like I like Slack, it's a great tool, but it's kind of like we didn't want to have to switch between all these different, when we were onboarding people, we had like 50 softwares that we were onboarding. It's just like, that's stupid. Let's just try to put everything as much as possible. If it has the functionality and we're going to be doing video calls all day, just use like the Slack chat, like it's fine, and the calendar and all that kind of stuff. But from a distraction standpoint, probably the number one most distracting thing for all employees everywhere would be Slack, or any kind of the messaging apps. I don't think that there's a super good solution to that, because there is a compulsion, or for a person who's more junior, like as a human, the thing that they're going to be doing is be constantly looking at the senior people in the company and trying to tune themselves towards that person to get the rewards that come from being attuned to senior management. So they like, for them to be responsive, then they've got like the ability for these chat apps to like distract them like at every second of the day. And I think most companies just simply don't even think about that, don't even care about it. Like it's just like, that's the reality for everyone, which is just like this absolutely like completely distracted workforce who's just constantly being barraged by messages, by notifications of messages, and that they expect, for people to be like answering within a few seconds of any kind of message they get. Even if you have like, you say, oh, we've got this async culture, which I think is like, is stupid. Like, I mean, generally you do need to have to be async, but like generally you need a lot of like time with people. But what you're looking for inside of that is to say like, how can we create periods of time where people can just do focused work and then pay attention to the results that come after there. Now, as an executive, you usually shouldn't be in the weeds on that kind of thing, but the manager's working for you, and then like, or even like if you have I really like flatter organization. So I like to be able to do coaching with people, but I want to see that the result is there, that after somebody spends some time in the focused work, that actually something comes out of it. Because it's like, a lot of times people will complain, and then they'll like, they're so distracted and they're so constantly getting barraged by all these messages that they are just dreaming of that moment to where they could have 3 hours of kind of like focus time, and then you give them 3 hours of focus time and they don't do anything, like, because they're too distracted. Like, they're going to look at social media and they're just going to have a very hard time anyway, because they're just so used to not focusing. So I think that from a team perspective, like as you look at the different teams you've got to find some times to where they can turn off their notifications, and that you really push them to do it. And that you just tell them like, you must learn how to turn off your notifications, but you need to communicate clearly with the team that's what it is. And there needs to be very, very fixed ways that people communicate that they're in focus time. And so we would typically say, you use something like the red or the green light, that you put a message like focus time between this and this. I think everybody is okay to adjust themselves and be flexible to what people need, as long as it's clear about what you need. I've even seen like in some books and things where they recommend like, that you tell in your voicemail and you put in your Slack like what your office hours are. Like, I can be reached between this time and this time. The rest of the time I'm in focus time and I'm not replying to any messages, and I turn off my notifications. I think there should be some like escalation to that. Like, if you really, really have something urgent that you need to text somebody and just say like, hey, I know you're focusing right now, but like this thing is blowing up and the client needs this and that and that. Many executives probably just abuse that, because like, a lot of you are just big assholes, and I am a lot of times too, like whatever. But like at least if it's there and you're trying to give people that focus time, so that they get the idea that they can turn off their messages and they don't need to be available like every second of every day. I think that's probably the number one thing, is just like the work like distraction, and the number two thing is going to be the like home distraction. And so solving for those is that's probably like the biggest hurdle. In my view, is a lot about the reps. Like, at the end of the day, it's like, look, whatever it is, figure your shit out and like do your work. And that's going to come through by the number of units you produce. So we do a good job of aligning of you deciding on what your forecast is of the units you're going to produce, and then you go do that, and then you produce them, and you'll be focused because you've got to you need to deliver those units. It's the worst thing is having these deadlines, which are like next week and next month, and you've got this big timeline, and you don't need to deliver things like every single day and constantly. Then you can just allow for the distraction. But if you just have this strong unit delivery of things, then for the most part, people they must avoid distraction. They must get their head down. And then when they don't accomplish what they want to, when they don't hit their forecast and they get frustrated with that, then they're going to be very, very open to trying to solve some of these distraction problems. And it's that's how it always was, is okay, here's a really tough forecast. And then hey, why did you miss your forecast? Oh, yeah, there's just so much distraction. I get asked a million questions by this person, by this person. Okay, how do we deal with that? Why are you answering all those questions? Oh, well, they ask them. Yeah, well, is that your responsibility? Well, no, but I want to be helpful. Yeah, and I appreciate that. Well, how about we only do that for these 2 hours, and then start dialing in on that, and then the next week you'll see some improvement and some improvement and some improvement until the person can kind of learn how to better say no or whatever. And that to me is the much better way, better solution for all this. Just focus on helping the person to have strong unit delivery. Get yourself fixed first, so you know what you're talking about, and so that you can show somebody who's not constantly on their phone and constantly looking and can actually do the work that they say that they will. Be a good example, be a good leader for that, and then look at the person when they get hired and just try to determine avoid people who have very distracting environments from the first place, and then help them to set up on the onboarding, help train them as to what good environments are, try to make sure that they're the things which are obviously going to mess up their productivity in terms of the visual aspect of their work environment, and then just have a very strong unit delivery, and then you're going to see that they're going to come to you and want to find out solutions to their distraction problems. So I hope that helps. It's a really big topic, and one that there's a lot to consider in it, but it's well worth it. I mean, that's the core of it is work. And even in the age of AI, where people are going to be able to do even far more, still they need to be able to get that AI to do what it needs to do, and to help them to do far more. And that requires a lot of focus work. I think that will never change as long as there's work to be done. You need to have distraction-free focus. All right, bye.